Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Dan's Astrology. I'm your host, Dan, and today I have a video for you on the topic of the full moon in Aries, which will be happening about a week from now. And also keep in mind that at the time of making this video, it's September the 30th, and there's a square between Mercury and Jupiter, which sort of leads me into this. I'm thinking mainly about this full moon that we're heading into because, for one thing, the planet Neptune is in Aries, and the planet Neptune is making a retrograde ingress back into Pisces. And there's something about this whole dynamic with Neptune and Aries, the way that Neptune stands for religious belief, religious or these kinds of delusional thinking and stuff like that. And I was thinking about the video I made recently about the where I was basically, this is the whole thing. Like, I've decided, I kind of gave in basically to reacting to the topic about the TikTok rapture or whatever. And I have to admit that there's something about all this. The Mercury Jupiter transit is reminding me of this principle from the Four Agreements, if you're familiar with that, to be impeccable with your word, to basically tell the truth, to say what you mean and mean what you say, and to try to be clear and try to be precise and to try to not express things that you don't mean, so that you would go back and like, oh, I sorry that I said that. And this is the whole thing, is that I'm taking this approach where I'm not editing these videos and trying to be very perfect. I've actually decided to embrace this thing as well, about giving myself some time to talk and not being totally uptight about being perfect and editing everything I say, because there's some kind of sometimes in the unintended things that I say, or sometimes I'll have an idea, and then when I'm trying to express that idea, there's some other something works its way in there. For example, I'll give you an example of this. Is that in one of my videos, I was like reading some Alan Watts books, and Alan Watts was talking about Wu Wei, or like this principle of non-efforting, and comparing it to jujitsu, right? And then for some reason I was gonna bring this idea up, and then somehow the word Brazilian jiu-jitsu just worked its way in there, even though consciously Brazilian jiu-jitsu had nothing to do with the idea that I was thinking about. Like, somehow my subconscious just wanted to like make it. I think it could also have to be with the fact that I think Brazilian jiu-jitsu is known as capoeira, or there's a certain kind of like jiu-jitsu dance, Brazilian dance called capoeira, and that there's a certain history of capoeira in I've never actually done capoeira myself, but apparently there's a certain history of capoeira studios in Vancouver or something. Or I don't. There's also some stuff going on. I don't know why. So the thing is, there's a certain thing that happens between me formulating concepts, ideas, and then turning the recording thing on, expressing it, and then somehow, even if what I have as my original concept has nothing to do with Brazil, sometimes that Brazil will work its way into there, right? And then similarly to this is that I, in expressing this stuff about a reaction to the TikTok rapture, I ended up making comments about Mormonism, and I don't necessarily think that, I don't really know if I'm comfortable. It ended up being, I consider this to be a sort of a dark synchronicity, since in the news now there was attack on a Mormon church, and it was like I perhaps unconsciously was expressing hostility towards Mormonism. And I just want to be upfront about this, is that I don't have any explicit like negative intention towards Mormons or anything like that. Although I have to admit that when I was a teenager, I think one of my friends, for some reason, gave me the Book of Mormon as like a joke. I don't even know where they got it from. I mean, maybe they got it from a thrift store or door to door salesman. I don't even know where this thing came from, but they're like, haha, Dan, here's a Book of Mormon. And it's like, I always just, and I ended up, like, this is the whole thing is that I collect a religious books or different texts, different things from like the Bhagavad Gita or the Tao Te Ching, all these kind of things. And I just, to be upfront about it, there is a basic, like, when I go through, I give away my books, and the Book of Mormon was not something that I chose to keep in my personal collection, right? And I don't know, I don't necessarily have any, I'm not saying that I'm in any place by which I should be making a judgment on Mormons or like judging a certain like. There's also I noticed this thing that came up in a Discord server that I was in where some people were making either jokes about Mormons or negative comments about Mormons, and there was a bit of controversy around that because it's sort of like sometimes people might do that with the assumption that there aren't any Mormons like it's like these in-group out-group jokes, right? Where it's like the in-group are people that will have a certain kind of judgment against some other people that are on the out-group, and by making these kinds of jokes, we're signaling to you that this is what the in-group is like, and that's what the out-group is like. And then you have to be like, it might be kind of controversial because then you're like, well, what? Hold on, what if I'm saying things that's sort of alienating or insulting or belittling whole portions of the audience that or people that might be it's like you're creating pointless divisions or hostilities towards people for no reason, right? um and there's something about all this with Neptune. There's something about Neptune which is like, if you read, I have a book, Liz Green's book on Neptune, and Liz Green talks about Neptune. It's not just about religion and not just about mysticism, but she clarifies it as specifically being forms of religion and mysticism that have a very accepting, kind of also maybe issues with boundaries, like, or this idea that we're like, it's like, unconditional love, or like there's you're transcending good and evil, or something. There's something about this where there's like peace and love and unity for all, and it's all peace and rainbow. But there's the shadow of that is that um, there's all the omission of the other or whatever, right? Or there's like this idea that we're going to be like totally all accepting, all loving, all unifying, um, but then you have to conform within something or else you're excluded, and that we have to like purge out all the people, and then it's sort of like there's like in some way that there's the thing that seeks to be totally all inclusive and all accepting somehow is blind to its own process of elimination, of needing to purify all the things that it can't accept, that it has to exclude in some sort of outgroup or whatever, right? If you understand what I'm saying. Or then this is okay. The other thing about this is that in my approach to making these videos, that I'm somewhat erratic, I find, when it comes to whether or not I'm going to talk about current events or whether or not I'm going to talk about try to stick to like personality or something. Like I've noticed that it is a particularly hectic time right now politically, or with things going on in the world. And in light of all this, there has been some astrologers who have taken the approach to make very non-political content or not dealing with the current events or whatever. And I have to I'm basically, because this is my own channel and because I'm not doing like, if I was working with a team of people and there was a certain established uh, you know idea of what we were doing, we're going to stick to a certain format of doing really current events focused things, or not, because I have this sort of flexibility where whatever content that I'm recording is specifically what I choose to record. I am basically I'm just doing what's reasonably within what I feel comfortable with. And I have to admit that when it comes to the politics around war, and explicitly with Israel and Gaza and Palestine and all this, that I am not neutral on the topic, but at the same time, I am uncomfortable. I'm not. I don't find it. I'm not really comfortable to just get into this in any sort of detail at any sort of regular basis, right? But it also seems like I do have to acknowledge that when we're talking about Neptune and we're talking about this Saturn Neptune conjunction, there's sort of like, this has kind of been going on for a few years now, this conflict. I mean, obviously, in the grander historical scheme of things, it's been going on for quite a long time. But just more recently, in the post-pandemic years, the war with both the Ukraine and Russia, which is my ancestry, that I have both Russian and Ukrainian ancestors, has been going on at the same time as this war with Israel and Palestine, and there's some basic problem around identity, whether that is racial or whether that is religious, and there's some issue about this where um, I'm basically going to say that it would be naive for me to just pretend like I'm completely have no opinion or preference or bias when it comes to these forms of identity. And when it comes to, like, for example, like I when it comes to the Book of Mormon, I don't want to be unconsciously in putting into my videos or whatever I'm saying some sort of unconscious hostility towards Mormons, because I don't think I don't even think I have much of a basis to have much of opinion about it one way or another, right? And but nonetheless, there's just a simple truth that when it comes to me choosing which kind of books that I want to keep in my shelf, the Book of Mormon isn't one that I personally choose to keep, right? It's not personally something that I'm investing a lot of, and but I don't also want to be intentionally expressing hostility towards people that hold different beliefs or practices that I choose not to believe in. And there's also this issue too that in recent times I think there's this it's like kind of almost like counterintuitive to me that it's like a trend towards traditionalism, because the whole point I think about traditionalism is that you're supposed to be upholding something that is like timeless and traditional, not just like a passing trend or a fad, right? Like that's the whole point, is that trends and fads are these ephemeral things that come and go, whereas a tradition is like connecting you to the timeless, right? So it's like, nonetheless, it seems sort of trendy to be very traditional, and that when it comes to the traditions, that I have my biological maternal lineage is Russian Orthodox and Catholic, but from family that my have decided to go much more secular, and then my mother became a Unitarian and never really raised me as a Christian. And then on my dad's side of the family, they're like the United Church, which is a kind of a bland form of Protestantism, which I don't know, just doesn't. I'm not really like. I'm kind of in this. I ended up going this direct, being motivated to make some content joking around about this book on Jungianism published by the Theosophical Society, because that was a there's something about religious New Ageism, or there's a certain bias towards stuff like Hermeticism, in being that people will criticize Hermeticism as being it's not a real tradition. It's just a mishmash of taking things like Neoplatonism and different kinds of mythologies, or different kind, maybe a bit of Gnosticism or something like that, or I don't know. Like there's certain things where people just create this sort of like New Age mishmash of a bunch of different stuff, and then like there's some kind of thing where people really like this idea that you're like, this is my, I'm not running away to some exotic esoteric thing. I'm upholding the tradition of my family and all this kind of stuff, and this is my identity and all this, right? And there's something in the, basically the relevance of this is that Neptune also has to do with this sort of thing about like the connection of the mother and the child, and the being absorbed, like this idea of like the porous boundary of like where the mother is like feeding the, if you're pregnant with a child and what you're eating or what you're, the stresses of the environment are all going in to color the child, right? And so as a child, may have these like, this is the kind of thing is that I think when it comes to a lot of these things about like religious sectarianism or whatever, that there's could be all these sorts of unconscious forces that come from the family, that come from the ancestors, that come, and there's all of this kind of stuff. It's a kind of a touchy subject, and I I don't I want to be able to there's just two things going on where I want to sort of keep in mind this whole four agreements thing about being impeccable with your word, right? The idea to that if I don't want to, the whole point is that if I'm get sloppy in what I'm saying in a video, if I slip up, what's interesting to me about this is that in trying not to be totally perfect about everything, in slipping up, it's like those mistakes. If I have like a Freudian slip and I say something about Mormons or something, or you know what I'm saying? Like, why is it that when I'm talking about, like, I'm going to talk about like jujitsu, and then it turns into Brazilian jiu-jitsu, or I'm going to talk about the rapture, and then suddenly I get distracted and I start talking about Mormons. It's like there's some kind of unconscious gravity around certain topics that it's like I'm thinking basically, never mind if we're thinking about divination or fortune telling or trying to do some sort of like experimental way of predicting things that are going to happen, I could just turn the camera on and record a whole bunch and then pick up what are the strange anomalies or the strange quirks, unexpected avenues of communication or conversation topics, and that regardless of trying to look at a chart and figure out what's going to happen, it's like the idiosyncrasies of my own communication could perhaps be an experimental form of divination. I've also been thinking, I'm not going to do it right now, but I took out this radio, and that there's this whole thing about like I watched. You can like scan the radio dials. There's even like this thing you can get, which are these boxes that are built that to automatically scan through radio stations and try to pick up like the different clips of words and then patching together like as a form of divination, and that you could even, there's also kind of things of like, maybe like collaging or something like that. But then this sort of brings it to there's another issue in all of this when it comes to the idea of manifestation, right? Like there's a certain thing that I have to admit, I am as a man, as a male, that my relation to the new age and spirituality is sort of colored by this whole thing that women tend to have their own little like new age full moon groups, that, and there's a certain kind of like scene of women's new age spirituality in that sort of like tends to be like doing like vision boards and stuff like this, and or like I guess also goal setting, which is also, this is one thing that like I've never really liked. I mean, maybe it depends on what context it's in, but like personally, goal setting has always come up in this context for me in my life that has rubbed me the wrong way, and like there's the vision boards is something that has been sort of alien, foreign to me, something that maybe ladies do in their little groups or something, right? But there's some kind of thing is that like I have been in my own art, like there's this kind of idea that like you'd make create a vision board for like the things that you resonate with or the things that you want to happen in your own life, right? And there's some kind of thing where it's like I may have no intention to do vision boarding, and yet I want to just like make art for the sake of making art, or this idea of like art as a contemplative practice, right? This idea that I might just want to make a collage and like have fun collaging, and that what I'm making in my collage, I don't necessarily want to be like this is something I want to manifest in my world, right? I just want to just like try to have fun with art making without it being like I'm trying to enact my will on the environment around me, right? But nonetheless, it does seem like there's this kind of thing that happens where sometimes in your art making, you may unintention like is it that you are intentionally or unconsciously by choosing certain images or by choosing certain things to talk about? Are you intentionally co-creating that in your environment? It's like you're unconsciously making vision boards even if you don't want to, right? Or like, is there a way that we can like separate the art making practice from a vision board thing where you can say that I want to just make art and not have it do this like be mixed up in this business of trying to manifest something. And so that if I want, like, this is the whole thing is like, you want to be able to, like, if you want to make art, you want to have the full freedom to be like, I want to have like demons and skulls and all sorts of bad things and then express that in my art, not be like, I don't want this to be like, I want to manifest evil and bad things in my life. I want to have the ability to make art and have it not everything I'm doing as like have art that's not a vision board. You know what I'm saying? Trying to say. But when I'm doing, I don't know, maybe that's a bit confusing because here in the context of doing these astrology videos, it's more specifically the point of an astrology video is more specifically to try to divinate or predict things that are going to happen and that to like to have an idea of what's going on, right? Whereas in an artistic practice, sometimes you're just like playing around with like you might if you want to make a song you're not thinking like oh if I play these chords in it hits the right vibration I'm going to win the lottery and everybody's going to love me. You're not trying to get an outcome. You're just playing the music and going with the process of the art, right? And so it's like I can be like expressing what I'm picking up from. I don't know, like I'm not like, you know what I'm trying to say? Like I don't want like my intention of making astrology videos or making full like there's this whole thing about like moon manifesting, right? Like our women's moon full moon circles, manifestation circles, all this kind of stuff. And with Neptune, basically what I'm trying to say is there's some issue with Neptune where there's the shadow of Neptune is like sort of like being blind to your own whatever you're being hostile to the outsider to trying to purify your in-group out-group thing, right? Just to be like, you know, or also this kind of like the problem with Neptune, another way to put it is that I think that in when it comes to manifesting that there's often this kind of like idea of trying to raise your vibration, but that being synonymous with just doing whatever feels good, right? And that there's this kind of like idea that if you're if you're following your intuition, and that what is good for you as a person is that if you follow your intuition and you're doing what you're aligning with what kind of intuitively feels good, then you are sort of guiding your intuitively steering the wheel of your personal ship in a good direction for you personally in your life. But there are all kinds of things going on in the world right now, which obviously don't feel very good, right? When it comes to all the war and conflict and bad things that are happening. and that there's some kind of thing about like like what I'm trying to say is that even in this whole kind of like Mary Kondo kind of like what does not cause joy, where it's like I'm just trying to say is that like even if I don't have any hostility, or I'm not trying to like turn any sort of group of people into an enemy, there's still going to be this thing where you're just going to be like, I'm just going to like retreat from all the business outside the world in my own little space. And then I'm going to just like, eliminate all the things I don't vibe with, like the Book of Mormon, out. All the, you know what I'm trying to say? And it's like, there's still this kind of thing where you're just like, oh, well, this is my stuff, that's your stuff. This is what I vibe with, that's what I don't vibe with. And there's, so like, and it's all going to be about me and me being happy. And then like, oh, well, it's like, it turns out there's this sort of like malignant narcissist thing where you're like, I'm just going to live in my happy bubble. And like, it's like a difficult time, like, part of like to balance these kind of things or whatever, because you're like, it's like, because you think you live in this little like this, you think you can do this thing where you're going to be like, I'm going to just create the best life for me as an individual regardless of whatever's happening in the world around me, and then I'll just be like, I'll just live in a little bubble of my little safe space and privilege, and that everything that, if it's like, oh, like images of all the bad stuff, bad vibes, it's only positive vibes only here. And it's like, there's something about just even that, like that sort of, that's not very good, is what I'm trying to say, right? And there's this kind of idea of like, instead of just like, I don't know, to try to be, I'm not saying, like I'm not also just trying to, I don't know, I'm admitting that I'm kind of confused about this, but this is basically the archetype that I'm recognizing, because you've got a full moon in Aries ruled by Mars, which has just been in this, when Mars hit that square to Pluto, that was around the time that we had this Mormon attack, right? And the thing is, there's also just crazy because there's so much crazy stuff happening, especially in America right now, that it could be very easy to just not pay attention, or just to be like, okay, America's crazy, I'm just gonna focus in on my little, I'm just gonna like turn off the news, and I'm just gonna like take out my vacuum, and I'm just gonna vacuum every little corner of my house or whatever, and then I'm going to like make everything clean and comfortable in my little safe space. And then, oh, look, my investments are doing well now. I guess I'm you know what I'm trying to say? This is sort of like, this is kind of this is a question about like being, I don't know, you're not being arrogantly isolated and protected from all the bad things out there, and that, and there's something about like, and then being this sort of the sense of everything, like total acceptance for everything, it's like this is the problem heading into the new moon, or the full moon in Aries with Neptune. Neptune retrograding in Pisces. I basically, my point of this, what I'm trying to say is that it's a psychological burden to be living through a time of great war and genocide, and that there's almost like, because, and it's also because my ancestry is like I have both Russian and Ukrainian ancestry. Even in my DNA test, I even have Siberian DNA, a very small amount of Siberian DNA, which is technically Russian, okay? But there in my it's like there's almost like sort of like ancestral survivor's guilt, right? And there's also this weird thing about like this idea of like Neptune, of being like, there's some sort of utopian promise in Neptune, in that like there's the dissolving of Neptune is going to like dissolve all the old class hierarchies or identity distinctions or something like that. But there's something really weird about this, in that I went to Eastern Europe once. It was only a short trip, but there's such a strange feeling. The idea of that people in Eastern Europe are human beings, and they're ancestrally even related to me. But there's this idea of the privilege that we have as like North American colonial people. And it's like, I really think that the politics is so strange because we're so blind, or I mean maybe we're not blind, but we really don't like having being reminded of that, or that the idea that we like Americans live in a very I think it's basically because part of this has to do with the geography, right? In that there's a certain sense of being like America in has been able to um, basically have their be very involved in war that's always being fought overseas, and there's a certain degree of the expectations, the entitlements of American life, and like just what you think you're what what the standard of American life versus the standard of living in what they call what these people describe as shithole countries, right? It's just bizarre, and it's like the way that these power hierarchies are so vulgar and explicit to the point where it's now been like there's things that have happened over the like where it's become obvious now that apparently Donald Trump's wife is a sex trafficking victim who is basically like a mail order bride that was sold to him, and she's our first lady is basically somebody from a sex trade ring, right? And it's like, or not our first lady. I'm Canadian. You were America's first lady, right? There's all these kind of like absurd things that we just have to like accept as like hyper normalization. There's all this stuff that's just normalized that we just have to deal. And there's sort of like this inherent that it's just odd, like to have this sort of like it's like the survivor's guilt. I mean, maybe this kind of guilt trip thing is another Saturn Neptune retrograde into I think Pisces and Saturn, Neptune and Pisces to me very feels like this sort of moralistic kind of guilt trip or something like that. But it's like I just feel like for all the people in Russia and Eastern Europe and all this kind of stuff that my ancestors left and immigrated away from there and was able to rise from being working class to having a university education after the war, and then going from being an ancestry of working class peasant people to being people who are now doctors and lawyers and stuff like this, and now having this sense where like I could if it's just odd to go to another country and then just sort of feel this difference where these people are genetically just the same as I am basically, but they're in this sort of impoverishment from history or whatever, right? And that there's this kind of thing where like all people are equal as people, but there's such a disparity between what this whole thing of the Western civilization that we judge these other people who are refugees or are of being like outsiders or like hostile invaders who are and for me it's just odd because I could go to the Ukraine and feel this fear of the other towards people that are literally like would be my genetic relatives, right? But it's because of history and it's because of geopolitics and it's because of all this kind of stuff that makes these people others, right? And there's this kind of thing about like with the Neptune archetype, it's like the contrast between wanting to have an all-embracing, all-unifying, acceptance of all of humanity versus there being like if there being there are actual divisions or different points of tension or points of conflict that are not always so easily glossed over, right? And I think the best thing when it comes, there's this whole idea of purification or whatever. And rather than being about like racial purity or like religious, purity, some spiritual ideal, I think for me, this has been coming up in terms of the um, trying not to be resentful, right? But then there's some kind of thing where it's like, even there's this ideal to be like all good vibes only and not be resentful. But then there's this still like, you have to be kind of on it. If like sometimes it's like you have to be, you can't bypass the resentment, and or you can, maybe you can just bypass all your resentments, all your bitterness, all the things you're frustrated and angry about, and put on the false ideal of universal acceptance. This is kind of the risk of Neptune. It's kind of the idea that it's a false image, it's fake, it's a fantasy, that you're going to be all love and light, and then then the part of you that isn't, you're going to be like, that's the devil, that's oh my god, you guys, it's like that's the evil thing that we have to exclude, so that it's all love and light, that I'm not going to deal with, right? And I don't know, I mean, there's this thing about I'm not like, there's something about all of this where I don't know, I don't claim to know anything about like whatever, like women's moon circle manifestation, all this kind of stuff. I don't claim to have, like, have very little expertise in all this kind of stuff. But I'm just kind of like, I'm realizing that I have this interest in divination, and that there's some there's something also with Neptune and fantasy, visualization, the image, that's particularly resonant around this kind of full moon. And there's this like some kind of issue where, to me, there's a lack of boundary between me trying to be perform this content creation thing, where I'm trying to do divination, I'm trying to help people, whatever you expect from a divination video. But then, like, all these other things, which may not be explicitly involved in that, seem to like, um, like it's like sometimes you want something, you want to have the freedom to be able to work with images, to be able to work with like visualization, but to have that not necessarily like not be manifesting things, right? Like for me, the problem is not like, or like, it's like there's some kind of irony of like, well, there's like, I don't want to be mixed up in manifestation if that's like religious violence or political violence or something like that. That I have this ideal that I believe in about non-violence, and about pacifism, and about friendliness and stuff like that. And yet there's some kind of like, it's like there's these forces of like, if I try to make a video, I might not even be thinking about Mormonism when I turn on the camera, but then like a bunch of stuff about Mormon stuff that's coming out of my mouth, and then there's something on the news about like Mormon churches getting shot and blown up. It's, you know what I'm trying to say? It's like, it's concerning for me. And I don't like, it's not my intent. Like, I don't go into this video being like, I really don't like this one group of people, and I don't want to be like this. Is basically the point of, as I understand it, from spiritual practices like Buddhism, the point is to not harbor ill will or feelings of hatred, or violence towards an enemy or any group of people. And this is similar to like with Christianity. Jesus, the point of Jesus says to love your enemy, right? And so there's this kind of thing, and the whole point is like, I wouldn't make identify these. If anything, I get caught in this problem about left and right politics, and perhaps I'm guilty of sort of like dreaming up an enemy to fight against in the form of like my imaginary version of a conservative. um but like, I think this has more to do with the fact that, I don't know. It's all, there's also this thing going on with Donald Trump and how he's trying to make Antifa a terrorist organization or whatever, and trying to like there's a lot of I have to admit that I feel perhaps personally targeted by this because I, for one thing, um, I think it's I think that it's important to be able to criticize. I think these fascist, you're to use the word fascism, or not to feel like the word fascism is somehow off limits. And also, that's also kind of curious because it's like the there's a broader there's a broader thing going on here when it comes to border politics, migration, and stuff like that, and the idea, this sort of like idea to keep something pure from contamination of the outside. This is all like, then you're keeping your borders and your boundaries secure and stuff like this, right? Um, I don't really understand. I don't know about. I don't really understand like why the whole like apparently in America this whole thing about like migration politics is actually there are actually quite a few people who vote for this, or like, I mean, I don't know, when I was like a young person, I kind of alluded already to when I did a very short trip where I went to Eastern Europe. I also spent a whole year in Australia, and since then I may have traveled a little bit but not very much. um and one of the things about traveling that's sort of like, I mean, what I don't really understand about the generation or the population today is that this is one thing that came up for me when I went to Eastern Europe, especially, is that when if you talk to Eastern Europeans, what's really bizarre is that, like, can you imagine, like, you're born in Eastern Europe and like, I don't know, one of these Balkan countries or something like that, and that with your passport they don't even let you travel to very many countries. That you're Imagine if you wanted to go on vacation and you have like three countries to choose from that you're allowed to go on vacation of, and then the rest of the world is like off limits to you for some reason, right? And it's like, wouldn't like if you put yourself in that position, doesn't that seem kind of like limiting? Doesn't that seem like the world is kind of like a fairly oppressive, limiting place? Like, and I know, like, and I mean, I think maybe I don't really understand. I think like people are used to. I don't really understand the mentality of people that are so afraid of foreigners or of migrants that they idealize very secure borders, as opposed, can't you like as a can't wouldn't these people, can't you empathize or put yourself in the shoes of somebody who's interested in like traveling and seeing the world and like expanding horizons, and then just being like, oh, wait a minute, oh, but the government says I can only go to two different countries, or like, I like every time, like, it's like every time I want to go somewhere, I have to have like my whole life investigated by the government or something. Like, why do you want that? Like, well, wouldn't it just like, doesn't it seem like it would just be more obviously a world is a better place if people could just go where they want and it wasn't like a fucking high security lockdown? And it's like, how on earth is this like an ideal that anybody wants? I don't get it. But the thing is, maybe this is just like my own, naive utopianism to like dissolve all the borders, dissolve all the boundaries. But I've always like, I've never, I just went through this thing anyways where I did a bit of traveling, and I basically I like the idea of having like, what if you just went backpacking and you just went from country to country and country, and you're just like exploring the world, and there was like the world is your oyster and there's no limits, and you get to just go on this grand adventure and see all this stuff. Like, what, like, don't you, doesn't that sound cool to you? And you're like, what? So if you're an American, you get to do that, but if you're like from another country, these people aren't allowed to go anywhere. Like why? I don't understand. This mentality has never made sense to me, and that I I'm like, Donald Trump just gave this address at the UN about the terrible failure of open borders. I don't think the borders were ever really that open to begin with. And it's like, why do people, I don't know. And the other thing is like, the other thing about this is that when it comes to RFK Jr. and the vaccine stuff, that I don't necessarily agree with the anti-vaxxers, and I don't necessarily agree with all the RFK Jr. people. And I don't. I think that it's. I think that they could just be trying to like save a whole bunch of money by saying that we're not going to take away people's vaccines, but we're not going to pay for them either. And so that if you have to pay for it yourself, then that saves a lot of money from the government having to pay for you or whatever, right? But at the same time, here I'm in a socialist liberal country where my healthcare is paid for by the government. But like what if I wanted to just go traveling, to go backpacking, to go like have a grand old adventure? I would have to like this the thing that's granted to me by the government. I would either have to like fly back home every 2 months to get my medication, or else I would have to like figure out a way to like pay for my medication while I was overseas. And then it's like it would be to the point where if I was to do this, it would be like I would go traveling, and then every 2 months I would have to like the equivalent of what I'd be paying for airfare. I would have to pay for pharmaceutical drugs every 2 months because apparently I can't live without them, right? And it's like it seems I don't know if they're doing me a favor by helping me, or if this is just meant to control my life, to feel like, oh great, I guess I'm just a prisoner of this. Like my whole life I'm just going to be stuck in this. At least they provide me with the services I need to live and be or to have good health, and so that my immune system isn't trying to kill me, right? But apparently I'm so dependent on this socialist government to provide that for me that I'm just going to be stuck in this one place for the rest of my life. And that if I ever want to travel anywhere, it's like you're kept on a short leash and you can't really go anywhere, right? And it's sort of like this is like maybe if there's some way about trying to create universal access to health resources, that is it liberating for people, or is it actually just, does that attempt to open up access to medicine become a way to control, because your dependency on that system is like keeping you on a little short leash so that you can't do anything, right? I mean, this is how, I don't know. Maybe I'm just a spoiled brat. Maybe I'm really lucky to be like it puts me in this situation where I don't have to feel like I don't have any big medical debt that I need to pay off. I'm in the green. I can just, I have all this free time, and I've got, but it feels like the world does not feel like a very free and open place. And I don't, I still have this basic principle that my vision of what a good world would be like is a world where it doesn't matter what country you're born in. If you want to go and see the world and take full advantage of the one life you have to live and live it up, do whatever you want. Like why do we have to like judge everybody with suspicion as if they're criminals? And they're like, it's like, or why can't we be like, I want the people in other countries to be free and be able to go everywhere and do what they want, and not to treat them as like oh my God, so we're going to have to keep them in a prison their whole lives, because if we don't, they're going to attack and rape everybody, right? Like, and it's like the idea, like, we're going to promise everybody this safe, peaceful, utopian society that comes at the expense of creating this terribly oppressive prison society. And then, like, we create a world of copium where it all just becomes about, like, oh, I just have to I just have to dissociate from everything and then just play fucking like some stupid little video game virtual reality world and just remind me about, so I can numb out from all the suffering in the world and call that freedom. I don't think so. I don't know. Maybe this is a bit of a rant. I'm trying to at least take account for the way this is all going with my particular take on doing an astrology channel and how it's been coming up for me, how I see at least with astrology, I can say that I'm like trying to deal with the archetypes so that like this whole stuff about identity politics, about religious or political violence, and I can see that these are the archetypes, and that it's not me. I don't want to cause. I don't want to contribute any energy or to harbor any ill will or hostility, but it's also like it's this weird kind of gaslighting thing where we're intentionally being provoked by by what's happening, and then being expected to be like, then we're creating a certain media environment where there's a certain disavowal or a certain dissociation or a certain kind of like everybody has to, we're just going to hyper focus on our own little like, me and my family and and what I'm doing for my little business. And then to be like, yeah, there's like all the big fucking archetypal shit. We're just not going to talk about it. Like the big picture stuff that really makes this year different than other years. We're just gonna pretend that's not happening, guys. We're just gonna tune it out, put on your little white noise generator, and just like your VR headset, and put the cucumbers over your eyes, and pretend we're not benefiting off the oppression of all these poor people in the world. Yeah, I don't know. Okay, anyways, this is the best I can do with this one. Thanks for watching.